Hello and welcome to another fine Tuesday and its Tea-ology. Uh, this last week I was away at my grandfather's funeral and a solemn but good time celebrating his life and the man that he was and that he has now gone home to be with his Lord and Savior. And so we're back. We've got our tea and we're continuing our long story of the work of God, the redeeming work of God. We began to talk theologically with tea, about God, who He is, and then about His works, about the creation, and then the fall. And so that has given us a picture of the world and the situation it is. And it makes sense of why there is so much beauty and goodness in the world and why there is so much evil and corruption in the world. But the story, if it was left at that point, would be just a tragedy, and we would be suffering in this meaninglessness and hopelessness that sin has brought into the world. But the good news is that God has reached down redemptively, has reached down to rescue his fallen creation. And so now we're looking at the story of redemption, and that story absolutely centers and climaxes with Jesus Christ and his work. But we want to work our way there by appreciating some of the setup of what is called in biblical scholarship sometimes redemptive history of God's work of preparation for the coming of Christ, because God did not immediately send the Redeemer just after the fall. In his wisdom and in his time, there was a long process of preparation for that decisive work of redemption that God would do, when the Father sent the Son by the Spirit for our redemption. And so we'll focus in more theological detail on that, but we're working our way there. And we've talked about the flood and about Abraham. And of course, we are not delving in detail into the whole Old Testament, though that would be wonderful to have a good grasp on the whole of the Old Testament to understand the gospel. But we're taking out some highlights. With Abraham, we talked about the call to faith and God calling a people for himself. And now we come to the event of the Exodus, God redeeming and rescuing a people for himself. And this happens down the history after God called Abraham and made him many promises and gave him his son Isaac. And the Isaac had his son uh, 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 Jacob, and Jacob had his children, which became the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel, and they all went down to Egypt. There was a famine in the land. And so they went down to Egypt and took refuge there, and they became a numerous people. And then there was a change in the governance or something, and the blessing that Jacob's son Joseph had been to the Egyptians was forgotten, and the people were perceived as a threat, and they were enslaved in Egypt. And God came to their rescue. And of course, the human agent whom God used in accomplishing his purpose was the man named Moses. And Moses was raised among the Egyptians, was adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, and then uh, he killed one of the Egyptians when he saw him beating one of his own people, the Hebrews, and he had to flee for his life. And it was so Moses had a long journey before he was pressed into service in the redemptive plan. But then came the incident with the burning bush. Moses was out there watching the sheep in his sort of exile out in the wilderness, and he saw a bush that was on fire but not burning up. And he approached it, and God spoke to him told him, "Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." That's Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. And God called him, God said, and he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." God identified himself in terms of the covenant that he had made, the promises, and the relationship that he had with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the great patriarchs. And here's the commission then that summarizes God's purpose and intent in the Exodus. So we're in Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 through 10. Then the Lord said, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." So, so the basic message of the Exodus is that the people of Israel, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of the patriarchs, are God's people. He calls them my people. And he sees their misery, that they have been afflicted and oppressed. And in fact, God knew this was going to happen. He spoke to Abraham about this. God, remember, is eternal and all-knowing. So this is communicated in a way that makes sense to Moses and to humans in our place, in our journey through time. And God speaks to us in ways we can understand. And so he speaks to Moses and says, these are my people. I see their suffering, and I'm going to rescue them and bring them into their own land. We can look here to continuities, the promises to Abraham, the promise of a people and of a land, and on to what God was going to deliver. But the Exodus especially stands in this pivotal place as the divine rescue of God's people. That they were a people, and yet they sort of become a nation by this act of God to redeem them from oppression. And it became hugely significant for the identity of Israel, and it remains a theme in understanding God's saving work today. The story goes on. Moses goes. He's not the most willing of messengers, but he ultimately goes, and he is faithful, and he has this extremely close relationship with God. Whatever you may say about Moses' weakness, he followed God. He was heroic in his courage and faithfulness, and he had a relationship with God of such extreme nearness. And he was God's instrument in this deliverance. Pharaoh refused to let the Israelites go, and God forced his hand. And of course, again, that was no surprise to God. And there is a strange interplay between God hardening Pharaoh's heart and Pharaoh hardening his heart that feeds into it, and that is part of that mystery of God's sovereignty and human freedom, and how these things fit together. And it is more mysterious maybe than resolved. But the initiative of God and the sovereignty of God is extremely strongly expressed in the story of the Exodus. And God overcomes Pharaoh. And there's a suggestion, maybe some see a battle between God and the supposed gods of Egypt, shown in the plagues, as God's power is shown in various places. But it is an exercise of God's strength to overthrow the oppressor and to bring freedom to his people. And it stands in that place that marker of God's redemptive work, where it is a historical event in the past, but it also has an enduring spiritual message that God is the Redeemer, that salvation is His work at His initiative. He calls the people to Himself and He reaches down to those who are enslaved and delivers them. And that is the story that then is seen in an even greater level in the work of Jesus Christ. God come to us Himself for our rescue. God who overpowers not just the Pharaoh of Egypt, but Satan and all of his demons. God who delivers not just from physical oppression, but from the oppressing power of sin, the dominion of darkness. God who rescues and redeems. And the lessons of the Exodus are about believing God's promise, uh, receiving from Him the gift of freedom and redemption. And if you are in a place where you wonder if God is able to save and redeem, the Exodus is a very powerful story to underline the redeeming power of God. I encourage you to read it and to think about the ability of God to rescue, the might of God to take hold of those who are enslaved and to redeem them. In any and every situation, God is able. He has reached out to us and called us to receive the gift of freedom and life in Jesus Christ our Savior. Well, may the Lord bless you as you go through your week. It's going to be warming up a bit, but these are some beautiful days. May God comfort you with His love and draw you near to Himself. Bye bye.